most people have never heard of a missing person named Jim Sullivan. So the fact that he simply vanished over 40 years ago shouldn't be that interesting, right? But Jim Sullivan was no ordinary man. He was a musical genius that inspired an almost cult-like following. That is, until he disappeared into the New Mexico desert in 1975. A big, rugged bear of a man, Jim went missing just when he may have been on the brink of his big break. His folk rock music was gaining in popularity, and he was seen by music insiders as the real thing. Released in 1969, his first album, titled UFO, was later described by National Public Radio as a mysterious masterpiece. So he definitely had his fans. Some called his music psych folk, a reference to his often otherworldly lyrics. The title song of his first album asked whether Jesus Christ arrived on Earth in a UFO and suggested that our time on this planet is nearing an end. But he says that's a good thing and that, quote, happiness is getting very near. And those lyrics are followed by the song Johnny, which describes a levitating man that will not return to Earth, although many are begging to learn his secret of flight. And the words to the song Jerome, which appears to be about a psychedelic drug dealer, are they perhaps about another otherworldly being?
And I found a magic man. I thought I found a magic hand. I kinda dream man.
Jim Sullivan's music career started with playing guitar in a local San Diego rock band called the Survivors. His sister-in-law Kathy was also in the band singing lead vocals. During that time, Jim and a friend bought a bar near the local college he attended, but the bar lost money, and in Jim's own words, quote, "At the same time I was going to college and working. Anyhow, me and another guy bought a bar near the college for income. We damn near starved to death." Hoping to kickstart his music career, in 1968 he moved with his wife Barbara and young son to Los Angeles. Barbara landed a job at Capitol Records, while Jim continued to write songs and perform in local clubs. He became a regular performer at a bar in Malibu, California called The Raft. Because of its high-profile location, Jim met and became friends with some well-known Hollywood figures such as Lee Majors, Dennis Hopper, and Lee Marvin. He even appeared as an extra in the iconic movie Easy Rider and landed a spot performing on the Jose Feliciano TV show. Things seemed to be looking up for Jim Sullivan. Friends donated money so Jim could record an album of his songs. He tried to get Capitol Records interested in releasing the album, but they passed on it. Apparently, Barbara working at Capitol didn't seem to help. A friend of Jim's did release the UFO album on a small record label, and Century City Records re-released the album in 1970. Unfortunately, not much came from all of this effort. Jim also recorded the song I Do What I Please from the 1971 box office hit Evel Knievel, but the song was not heavily promoted and it failed to get much in the way of attention or sales. In 1972, he recorded a second album, self-titled Jim Sullivan, which was released by Playboy Records. But the album flopped. With nothing panning out in Los Angeles despite numerous close calls, Sullivan decided to head to Nashville, where his previous bandmate and sister-in-law Kathy was working as a singer-songwriter. Kathy's husband was a guitarist in Nashville, and Jim was hoping that their connections could lead him to success in the country music mecca. Jim's marriage was having trouble in spite of the birth of his second child. He had started to drink too much, and that was taking its toll. Maybe Nashville was the new start he needed. His plan was to travel to Nashville, get settled, and then bring Barbara, his son, and newborn daughter out to join him. According to friends, he left Los Angeles in March 1975 in his old VW Bug with $120 in his pocket. After a 15-hour drive, he was close to Santa Rosa, New Mexico, and decided to check into the local La Mesa motel. Well, that's when the story gets murky. According to Barbara, a day after Jim left, he called her, telling her that he was all right. Confused, Barbara asked him what he meant by that. Reportedly, Jim responded, "You wouldn't believe if I told you." And then she asked, "Jim, what's the matter? Is anything wrong?" And he said, "Forget it. Just forget I said anything. I'll call you from Nashville." This conversation was reported in an article in the New York Times and was the last time that Barbara ever spoke with Jim Sullivan. After days went by with no further communication from Jim, his family began calling hospitals and the police. After reporting him missing, the New York Times recounted that his family was informed that Jim had been pulled over on suspicion of driving under the influence, but he passed a sobriety test and then checked into the motel in Santa Rosa. Later that day, his car was seen on a ranch belonging to the local Giannetti family, who said they confronted him about trespassing on their property. After that, no one knows or no one will say what happened to Jim. The following day, his car was found 26 miles away with his guitar in the front seat. His friends strongly believed that he would never leave his guitar behind, regardless of the circumstances. Family members came to New Mexico and joined the search for Jim. An officer told Barbara's sister that Sullivan hadn't been put in jail after being pulled over, but if you ask me, that's where he belongs, probably referring to the sobriety test. Police told Barbara that the bed at the La Mesa Motel in Santa Rosa had never been slept in, and that Jim had purchased a bottle of vodka at a nearby corner store. He apparently drove around town before ending up near the Giannetti family ranch. The ranch is where Jim's car was found, along with his wallet, guitar, clothes, and miscellaneous personal papers. Also in the car was a box full of Jim's unsold albums. A few weeks later, there was a potential lead in the case when a body was found 8 miles west of Las Cruces, New Mexico. A local newspaper thought that perhaps it was the body of Jim Sullivan, but later the authorities identified it was someone else. Then, pretty much nothing happened. Jim had vanished into thin air with no witnesses or additional clues. Sometime after his disappearance, the police towed the abandoned VW Bug back into town, and the trail turned cold. So what really happened to Jim Sullivan? There have been several theories to explain his disappearance, but nothing has ever been proven. Probably the most common theory is that he drove out on the dusty, isolated desert road, drank too much vodka, and then wandered out into the desert, losing his way and eventually dying of exposure. And who knows? After the string of recent disappointments in his music career, maybe it was suicide. The curious thing about that theory is that you would think that his body would have been found. He was a big man and couldn't have wandered too far from his car, especially if he was drunk. It would seem that the authorities should have had no trouble finding his body, dead or alive. Another rumor was that the cops who pulled him over had an altercation with Jim. He was kind of a belligerent hippie type, and they killed him. But that sounds a little far-fetched to me. Other people say that the Giannetti family, on whose land his car had been found, had mafia ties and for some reason took him out when he wandered onto his property. That notion also seems pretty unlikely. Perhaps we should look to the person who knew him best, his wife Barbara, to find out what she thought was at the bottom of her husband's disappearance. Barbara was sure that Jim's vanishing was no accident. She was certain he had been abducted by aliens in the New Mexico desert that day. As crazy as that sounds, there were stories about glowing orange lights in the sky around the time the search for Sullivan was happening. Again, nothing was substantiated. Wow, that's a pretty crazy theory. Even if Sullivan's first album was titled UFO, and many of his songs had haunting, otherworldly vibes. But then it was revealed that both Jim and Barbara Sullivan had a long-time fascination with UFOs and the possibility of otherworld visitors to the Earth. That fascination surely contributed to the eerie nature of some of Jim's songs. Roswell is one of the next major towns to the south of Santa Rosa, about 130 miles away. There were those that thought that maybe he went to check it out, but then got lost. He definitely would be interested in the alien and UFO history of Roswell, but he had just driven 15 hours, and it seems unlikely he would try and head that far south. Perhaps alcohol clouded his thinking? Maybe. So what do you think happened to Jim Sullivan? Do you agree with the most popular theory that he got drunk and wandered off into the New Mexico desert? It's a big, unforgiving place, so maybe that's the most likely explanation, even if search parties were not able to find any evidence. Weird. Or did the Giannetti family truly have mafia ties, and did Jim see something he shouldn't have? Well, I guess anything's possible. I guess it's also possible that Jim did run into a UFO on that March night in New Mexico. It wouldn't be the first time a UFO was seen in that part of the state. So did Jim's fascination with all things alien and otherworldly lead him to come face to face with a UFO in the New Mexico desert that March night in 1975? We may never know. For now, it is just another mysterious vanishing.